I'm Scott Campbell. Hey. Where to start is kind of tough because it kind of started more when I was in, I'd say about 5th grade. My dad had, he also had a mental disorder. We weren't sure what it was at the time. It turns out that it was a manifestation of late-stage Lyme disease, where he was actually losing cognition in parts of his brain. He would have these rage attacks where he had no idea who he was or who anybody was. He would scream, he would throw things, and my mom would ask me to leave the house. Me and my sister would have to go over to my neighbor's house when this was happening, and it was scary because he would come back, you know, anytime between 20 minutes or maybe a couple hours, he'd come back to normal, and you never knew when you were talking to him which version of my dad was the right version. On top of that too, he was also full-time employed with benefits and things like that. We had not like a rich life, but a stable life. We were never unsure where groceries were gonna come from, and medical bills piled up, and we had no idea what was wrong with him. And more, we started noticing that, you know, he couldn't go to work until months. He was just out of work. He didn't lose his job until he lost it after several more months of not working. So that was my first experience not knowing where money was coming from. My first experience kind of like starting to see what poverty looked like or what it looked like to lose stability. A lot of it came from that of thinking, if I'm gone, my parents will have one less mouth to feed. But on top of that too, where I mentioned my dad was going through that, I started going through something similar as well, where I was angry all the time or I was sad all the time, but my depression seemed to manifest in attacking other people. I was really struggling around the 7th and 8th grade timeline. Towards the end of 8th grade, I was thinking about suicide almost every day, thinking my family would be better without me. It was like, it wasn't a thought my family would be better without me. In my head, I just knew that they would be better without me. What I did is I read this bottle of some sort of gaseous aerosol that said like, inhalation will cause instant death, and that was just on my mind for months and months and months, thinking, well, that's an easy way out. So I hooked up this kind of dramatic system where it would be kind of like a consistent source of inhaling it with no oxygen. I figured that would be a very painless, peaceful way to go. My parents wouldn't have to clean up any mess or anything. I started realizing I was extremely dizzy and my vision was going black. I remember falling backwards onto my bed, touching my face and saying, well, this is it. The second I regained consciousness, I kind of like wobbled away, and I heard my mom screaming outside of my door, screaming at my sister who was trying to help me. And I went over and I tried to hug my mom, and she tried to push me away, and I just like forced myself on her, like sobbing and not telling her yet what I tried to do, but she wanted very little to do with me, and I looked at her and tried to open my mouth to tell her what happened. And the look on her face, but even before I told her, it just hurt really bad to tell my mom, who raised me for, at this point, 13, almost 14 years, what I just tried to do and what almost happened, what I was seconds away from actually accomplishing. At first it was something that I kept to myself, something I didn't really want to tell anybody because, well, why would I want to tell anybody that? I didn't want them to think I was being dramatic. I didn't want them to think that I was just trying to get attention or that I lied. I guess we kind of came to the conclusion that if we could talk about it openly, it might affect other people to the point where maybe they were struggling with something and they were an inch away from doing it, and maybe just by talking about it, they'd be a foot away from doing it. But I can't say how many times that I was just about to do something irreversible and I got a nice text from a friend saying, I'm just checking up on you. Really sit with yourself and think say that your depression, your suicidal thoughts, whatever mental disorder you happen to be dealing with in the moment, say that it cleared up. Whether it was a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, say it cleared up, and think of all the things that you would miss. And this is gonna sound really cheesy, but sometimes driving and seeing a sunset is beautiful because you're not going to see that same sunset ever again. I'm still here because I chose to be, and I can unchoose to be at any time, but if at any point earlier in my life I chose not to be here, I would have missed out on some of the best things I've ever experienced, and otherwise I never would have gotten to know it.